The first time Lady Vivienne Marlowe tried to smile at the children of Ashford Manor. The youngest girl hid behind the governess and whispered a word that shattered the entire room. Mother, the ballroom fell into a silence so complete that even the musicians forgot to move their bows. Rose Ashford, only 7 years old and still haunted by nightmares since her mother's death, had crossed the room before anyone could stop her. She clutched the skirt of Emily Harper, the young governess standing quietly near the wall, and buried her tearful face against the plain dove-grey fabric as though Emily were the only safe place left in the world. Little Thomas, pale and fragile after a winter fever, followed soon after and wrapped both arms around Emily's hand. Even Oliver, the 10-year-old heir of Ashford, stepped in front of them with a stiff little chin, trying to look brave enough to protect the woman who had protected all of them. Lady Vivienne's perfect smile froze. Duke Adrian Ashford stood beside her, his expression unreadable, though the shock in his eyes betrayed him for the first time that evening. He had invited half the county to Ashford Manor to announce what everyone already expected. That Lady Vivienne Marlowe, the beautiful noblewoman once admired by society and once loved by him in a younger, more foolish season of his life, would soon become his wife and the new Duchess of Ashford. It was supposed to be a practical decision. His children needed a mother, his house needed a mistress. His name needed stability after 2 years of mourning. Instead, his children had chosen their governess in front of every noble guest in the room. Emily Harper could feel the judgment forming before anyone spoke. She was 24, the daughter of a deceased village physician, hired only because 3 governesses before her had failed to manage the Duke's grieving children. She had come to Ashford Manor for wages, not affection, and she had planned to stay only long enough to pay for medicine for her younger brother. She owned no jewels, no family influence, and no protection against a woman like Vivienne. Yet Rose's tiny hands clung to her as if letting go would mean being abandoned all over again. "Please don't let her take us away," Rose whispered. A murmur passed through the ballroom. Vivienne's eyes hardened for only a heartbeat before she lowered them with exquisite pain. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough to sound wounded and clear enough for everyone to hear. "My dear child, no one is taking you away." Rose shook her head and pressed closer to Emily. Adrian stepped forward. "Rose." The girl flinched. The movement struck him harder than any accusation could have. Adrian Ashford was a powerful man, feared in Parliament and respected across 3 counties. But he had never known what to do with his children's grief. After his wife died, he had tried to manage sorrow the way he managed estates. With order, discipline, schedules, tutors, physicians, and distance. Oliver became silent, Rose began waking in terror. Thomas stopped speaking for months. Adrian told himself time would mend them, but time had done very little until Emily Harper entered the nursery. She had not performed miracles. That was the trouble. If she had been grand, dramatic, or obviously manipulative, Adrian might have dismissed her more easily. Instead, she had simply stayed. She stayed when Oliver ruined lessons and told her governesses always left. She stayed outside Rose's room with a candle until the child dared to open the door after nightmares. She stayed beside Thomas through 3 fevered nights, cooling his forehead, and singing the old village lullaby her father had once used for frightened children. When Thomas finally recovered enough to whisper, "Don't go," Emily had promised only that she would be there when morning came. The children remembered. So did Vivienne. Lady Vivienne Marlowe had returned to Ashford dressed in regret and gentleness, but beneath the pearls and cream silk lived an ambition that had only sharpened with disappointment. Years earlier, she had left Adrian to pursue a richer match, only to find widowhood less profitable than she had imagined. Now she had come back, beautiful, polished, and ready to reclaim what she believed should have been hers. She did not fear servants, governesses, or poor young women in plain dresses. Until 3 children called one of them mother. Emily gently placed a hand over Rose's hair and bent down, trying to keep her voice steady, though shame burned through her. "Rose, sweetheart, you must go back to your father." "No," Rose said trembling, "not if she is coming." Vivienne turned just enough for the nearest guests to see the sorrow on her face. I fear Miss Harper has allowed the children to become confused. It was a delicate accusation, but every adult in the room understood its meaning. A governess should never become too necessary. A woman of low birth should never allow noble children to love her with such desperate openness. Affection in a house like Ashford became dangerous the moment it looked like ambition. Adrian's jaw tightened. This is not the place for such a discussion. Of course, Vivienne murmured, lowering her eyes. I would never wish to distress them further. She stepped back as though sacrificing her own dignity for the children's sake. Several guests looked at her with sympathy. Someone whispered that poor Lady Vivienne had been humiliated. Emily heard it, and so did Oliver. The boy turned toward the whispering woman and spoke with a cold clarity too old for his age. She did not humiliate Lady Vivienne. We only told the truth. The room went still again. Adrian dismissed the guests soon after, but the damage had already been done. By morning, every drawing room in the county would know that the Duke's children had rejected his chosen bride, and publicly claimed their governess as mother. Vivienne accepted the embarrassment with lowered lashes and quiet tears, which made her look noble to everyone except Emily, who saw the calculation in the way Vivienne waited until Adrian was watching before she let her composure tremble. That night Adrian found Vivienne in the blue sitting room, seated beside the window with a handkerchief pressed to her lips. I do not blame them, she said before he could speak. They are only children, and grief makes children cling to whatever comfort is nearest. But Adrian, you must see what has happened. Miss Harper has become too important to them. She has helped them, Adrian answered. And I am grateful, Vivienne said, lifting tear-bright eyes to his. But gratitude is not the same as safety. If your children begin to believe a governess is their mother, what happens when she leaves? Or worse, what happens if she realizes she need not leave at all? The words found the wound she had aimed for. Adrian had already failed his children once by retreating into grief after their mother died. The thought that he might fail them again by allowing them to attach themselves to someone temporary filled him with a fear he could neither confess nor ignore. From that evening, Vivienne began her quiet war. She never attacked Emily directly. That would have been too crude. Instead, she corrected her with sweetness, praised her with poison, and mentioned to Adrian how often Thomas asked for Miss Harper before asking for his own father. She suggested that Rose's nightmares might be worsened by dependence on someone below her station. She sighed over Oliver's attachment and wondered aloud whether a boy destined to inherit Ashford should be so influenced by a governess with no understanding of noble duty. Emily understood what was happening, but defending herself against Vivienne was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Every insult came wrapped in concern. Every accusation wore the mask of sympathy. So Emily did what she had done from the beginning, she turned back to the children. She helped Oliver transform estate ledgers into arithmetic puzzles, pressed dried flowers with Rose in a book titled Things That Stay, and coaxed Thomas to eat by letting him feed crumbs to the sparrows outside the nursery window. But Adrian began to change. Not entirely, not cruelly in any obvious way. Yet enough that Emily felt it. He entered rooms just after laughter and grew silent. He asked whether it was proper for her to sit with the children after dark. Questioned medicines, lessons, routines, and whether a governess should be so present in their private hours. His doubt did not become an accusation, but it stood between them like a door slowly closing. Then Thomas fell ill again. It happened on a rain-heavy afternoon when the corridors smelled of damp stone and extinguished candles. Emily had left the nursery only long enough to fetch a clean shawl for Rose. When she returned, Thomas lay shivering beneath his blanket, his face pale and his breathing thin. Beside his bed sat a half-empty cup of herbal tonic Emily had not prepared. Panic struck her so sharply she almost dropped the shawl. She called for the nurse, then for the physician, then gathered Thomas into her arms as though she might anchor him there by sheer love. Rose began crying near the window. Oliver stood rigid in the doorway, his young face drained of color. Vivienne arrived with Adrian minutes later. Her gaze moved first to the cup, then to Emily's hands around Thomas. What did you give him? Nothing, Emily said, stunned. I never brought that. A maid stepped forward, trembling badly enough that her lie looked almost like fear. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I saw Miss Harper near the medicine cabinet earlier." Emily turned toward her. "That is not true." But even as she spoke, Vivienne's eyes dropped to Emily's apron pocket. A small brown bottle protruded halfway from the fabric. Emily saw it at the same moment Adrian did. She had never placed it there. The room seemed to narrow around the bottle, the cup, the feverish child, and Adrian's hand. As he slowly took the vial from her pocket, Vivienne's voice broke into a whisper filled with perfect horror. "Your Grace, what if she wanted the children to depend on her?" Emily stepped back as if the words had struck her. "No." Thomas whimpered weakly from the bed. She moved toward him by instinct, but Adrian lifted one hand. "Not now." He did not shout. He did not call her guilty. He did not order her from the house. Yet the quiet command hurt more than any public insult could have because Rose began sobbing at once. Oliver shouted that his father was wrong, and Thomas tried to reach for her with trembling fingers. Emily left the room before Vivienne could watch her break. The door closed behind her. Inside, Rose cried for her. Thomas called faintly, "Mother," while Oliver's voice rose in angry protest. And Emily stood alone in the corridor, one hand pressed against the wall to keep herself upright. Listening to the children she loved beg for her, while the man who should have protected them all chose doubt. For the next 3 days, Ashford Manor no longer felt like home, where a sick child was being nursed back to health. It felt like a house waiting for a verdict. Thomas survived the night, though the physician admitted the tonic he had swallowed had been far too strong for a child's body. It might have been mistaken for a careless accident, if there had not been a bottle found in Emily Harper's pocket. A trembling maid who claimed she had seen Emily near the medicine cabinet. And Lady Vivienne Marlowe standing beside Duke Adrian with tearful restraint, urging him not to ignore danger simply because it wore a gentle face. Emily was not sent to prison. Adrian did not go that far. But he ordered her to remain in her room until the matter could be examined. He told himself it was caution, not punishment. Yet when Rose cried until she could barely breathe, when Thomas woke from fever calling for Emily, and when Oliver stood before his father with a face too pale and too bitter for a 10-year-old boy, Adrian knew the difference no longer mattered. "You are punishing the only person who stayed," Oliver said. Adrian had no answer. That was what haunted him most. Not Vivienne's warnings. Not the whispers already moving through the county. Not even the bottle in his hand. It was the way his son looked at him as though he had become one more adult who chose appearances over truth. Vivienne used that silence well. She did not celebrate. She did not demand that Emily be dismissed immediately. She moved through the manor with wounded patience, sending flowers to the nursery and speaking softly of the children's future. She told Adrian that affection could be dangerous when it crossed proper boundaries. She said Emily had encouraged dependence, perhaps not out of cruelty, but out of hunger for a place above her station. Then with glistening eyes, she said she would still marry if he believed she could restore order to his broken household. Because she never asked for victory directly, she made victory sound like sacrifice. Emily heard none of those conversations, but she felt their weight in every locked hour. No small footsteps came running to her door. No Rose pressing frightened drawings into her hand. No Thomas asking for lullabies. No Oliver pretending he did not need comfort while standing close enough to receive it. Mrs. Wren, the old nurse, came only once after midnight, moving quietly as though kindness had become dangerous. She told Emily that Thomas was improving but that he still asked for her whenever the fever rose. Then Mrs. Wren placed a small cloth bundle in Emily's palm. "Master Thomas wanted you to have this." Inside was a wooden button from his coat, one Emily had sewn back on weeks ago. Because Thomas had insisted no one else could mend it properly. It was nothing. A child's keepsake. A useless little thing. Yet Emily held it until her composure nearly failed. Because it was proof that the love in that nursery had been real even if the adults of Ashford Manor now treated it like a crime. By the fourth morning, Emily decided to leave. Not because she was guilty. Not because Vivienne had. But because she had learned that children suffered most when adults used love as a weapon. If her presence gave Vivienne reason to torment them. If Adrian's doubt made him willing to close the nursery door against her. Then perhaps leaving would hurt them less than staying where she was no longer allowed to protect them. She packed her few dresses, her father's medical notebook, and the wages she had saved for her brother's medicine. Then she sat at the desk and began a letter to Adrian. She did not beg. She did not accuse. She wrote only that she had never harmed Thomas, never encouraged the children to call her mother, and never desired a place in Ashford Manor that had not been freely given by the children themselves. Before she could sign her name, the door opened. Oliver slipped inside with Rose's sketchbook pressed to his chest. "Oliver," Emily whispered, rising at once. "You cannot be here." "I know," he said. "That is why I waited." His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he placed the sketchbook on her desk. Rose drew something. "She is afraid to show father." Lady Vivienne told her that wicked stories make wicked things happen to people she loves. Emily opened the book carefully. Most pages held flowers, sparrows, nursery windows, and clumsy drawings of Thomas asleep beside her chair. Then she reached the final page and felt the breath leave her body. Thomas lay in bed beneath a blue blanket. Beside him stood a woman in a cream gown with yellow hair and pearls at her throat. A bottle was in her hand. Near the door, a maid stood with one finger pressed to her lips, Vivienne. Emily closed her eyes for one moment, not from fear but to master the fury rising in her. Vivienne had not only harmed Thomas. She had frightened Rose into silence, turning a child's terror into a shield for her own crime. When Emily opened her eyes again, she was no longer leaving. "Oliver," she said quietly, "take this to Mrs. Wren. Tell her to hide it until tonight." That evening, Ashford Manor glittered again, though the beauty of it felt colder than before. Vivienne had persuaded Adrian to host a private dinner for a smaller group of influential guests. A gathering meant to end the scandal and confirm her place beside him. Candles shone on silver branches. Music drifted through the ballroom. Vivienne stood in pale gold silk, serene and sorrowful, while Emily was summoned not as a guest but as a problem to be dealt with. She entered in the same plain grey dress, her face calm despite the whispers following her across the floor. Vivienne stepped forward with soft triumph hidden beneath gentleness. "Miss Harper, His Grace has allowed you this chance to speak before matters worsen. For the children's sake, I am willing to forgive your confusion if you admit that your attachment became improper." Emily looked at her. "You want me to apologize for loving lonely children?" A murmur stirred among the guests. Vivienne's smile tightened. "I want you to admit you forgot your place." Before Emily could answer, the ballroom doors opened. Oliver entered first, dressed in formal black, his small face set with fierce determination. Rose followed, trembling but upright. Thomas came last, weak but determined, holding Mrs. Wren's hand. When Adrian saw him, all colour left his face. "Thomas, you should be in bed." Thomas did not answer. He crossed the floor slowly and took Emily's hand. This time Adrian did not stop him. Oliver lifted Rose's sketchbook. "You said adults need evidence. So we brought evidence." Vivienne gave a soft laugh. "A child's drawing cannot ruin a lady's name." "No," Oliver said. "But it can show what a child was too frightened to say." He opened the book. The room went silent as everyone saw the cream gown, the yellow hair, the bottle, and the maid at the door. Rose began to tremble, but Emily knelt beside her, waiting until the child leaned against her shoulder. "I saw her," Rose whispered. Lady Vivienne came into Thomas's room. She poured something into the cup. Lucy was at the door. Then Lady Vivienne told me if I told wicked stories, Miss Harper would be taken away. Every gaze turned toward the maid. Lucy burst into tears before anyone questioned her. Vivienne's face hardened. "This is absurd. A frightened child and a hysterical servant cannot destroy me." Mrs. Wren stepped forward then, old and small but unshaken. From her apron, she withdrew a lace handkerchief marked with Vivienne's initials. I found this behind the nursery screen after Master Thomas fell ill. It smelled of the same herb the physician named. I kept it because I have served this family long enough to know when grief is being used to blind a man. Adrian looked at the handkerchief. Then at Lucy. Speak, he said. The maid sobbed into her hands. Lady Vivienne paid. She told me to place the bottle in Miss Harper's pocket when Miss Harper lifted Master Thomas. She said no real harm would come, only enough to make your grace send her away. The last colour drained from Vivienne's face. For one moment, she remained perfectly still. Then the mask broke. All this for a governess, she hissed. She is nothing. No blood. No name. No future. Those children needed discipline, not village songs and... Thomas stepped closer to Emily and held her hand tighter. She stayed, he said. The words were small but they struck the room harder than any accusation. In a house filled with titles, wealth, and polished cruelty, a child had named the one thing no rank could replace. Adrian turned to Vivienne, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. You entered my house, he said, his voice low and cold. You harmed my son. You frightened my daughter. You bribed my servant. And you used my grief to make me doubt the woman who protected my children. When I was too afraid to protect them myself. Adrian, you will leave Ashford Manor tonight. If you speak Miss Harper's name in society, I will answer with the truth in every drawing room from here to London. Vivienne stared at him as if she could not understand that the future she had nearly claimed was gone. Then she turned and walked out beneath the judgment of the very society she had tried to command. But Adrian did not watch her leave. He crossed the ballroom and stopped before Emily and the children. Then in front of every guest, the Duke of Ashford lowered himself to one knee. Emily, he said, his voice rough with shame. I was wrong. I let fear speak louder than truth. I let another woman use my grief against my own. And when Thomas called for you, I closed the door. Emily's eyes filled, but she did not look away. I cannot undo that moment. Adrian continued, but if you can bear to remain, I will spend the rest of my life making certain no door in this house closes against you again. For a long moment, Emily was silent. Rose clung to her side. Thomas held her fingers. Oliver watched his father with guarded hope. At Ashford, Emily said softly, children learned to beg for what should have been freely given, trust, warmth. Someone to stay. Do not ask me to heal what you will not help mend. Adrian bowed his head. Then teach me how to mend it. She did not forgive him completely that night. Pain did not vanish because a man knelt. But she stayed, and that was the first mercy. Weeks turned into months. Adrian changed, not through grand speeches, but through presence. He came to breakfast. He listened when Oliver argued. He sat outside Rose's door after nightmares. He learned Thomas's favorite lullaby so poorly at first that the child laughed. And said he sounded like a wounded church bell. Emily remained at Ashford Manor, no longer hidden like a servant whose love had embarrassed the household, but honoured. As the woman who had held it together when everyone else mistook grief for order. When spring returned, Adrian found her in the garden with the children. Oliver read beneath a tree. Rose wove daisies into Thomas's hair. Thomas pretended not to enjoy it. Emily sat among them, laughing softly, sunlight warming the brown waves of her hair. Adrian stood there for a moment, watching the family he had almost lost. Then he walked to Emily and offered his hand. I once thought my children needed a duchess, he said. I was wrong. They needed love. They needed patience. They needed someone who stayed when staying was difficult. Emily looked up at him. And what do you need, Your Grace? Adrian opened a small velvet box. Inside lay the Ashford ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds worn by generations of duchesses before her. I need the woman who taught my house how to become a home again, he said. Not because the children chose her before I understood why. But because I choose her now with my eyes open. Emily looked at the ring, then at the children whose faces were bright with hope. Yes, she whispered. But only if this house never forgets that children are not healed by titles. Adrian slid the ring onto her finger. Then we shall remember every day. Rose ran to her first. Thomas followed, then Oliver after one stubborn moment of pretending he was too old for such things. Adrian drew them all close, awkwardly at first, then with the quiet wonder of a man learning that a family was not restored by command but by love. May we still call you mother? Rose asked. Emily looked at Adrian. This time there was no fear in his face. Only gratitude. Emily kissed Rose's hair and held the children close. Then I suppose, she whispered, I am already home. And for the first time in years, Ashford Manor did not feel like a monument to everything lost. It felt like a place where love had finally chosen to stay.